Okay, good morning, guys. Welcome to the round six of the University of Ghana, sorry, University of Cape Coast, Ghana University's Debate Championship, GDC Ogaman 2024. The motion for the House today reads that this House believes that the Democratic Republic of Congo should nationalize its mining industry. Odei Apiayo, and I'll be your chair for this round. On my left is Mahadi, and on my right is Sonia. I do believe that we all know the rules governing DP debates, and so we welcome the Prime Minister to start the debate for us. Guys, let's make it engaging and interesting. And don't badger, ask POIs and then take POIs. Prime Minister, ready when you are. You can sign. I wanted to sign.
Sure. Okay. So my sheets are just slightly misplaced. Okay. So I'll begin my speech in three. Before that, I'll take POIs from close. I'll prioritize from closing, but if closing doesn't have, I'll take from opening. Anyone. Slower. I will take POIs from. I'll prioritize from closing. If they don't have, I'll take from opening. That's fine. I'll begin my speech in three, two. You can't hear me. Okay, I'm so sorry. I'll begin my speech in three, two, one. Why do we need to do this? First of all, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, the companies that exploit these mines, not only the mines, but also the people who work in these mines, do so to such an inhumane extent, to the extent where they treat human beings as a means to an end, simply to be able to get the benefit that they have to be able to make their manufacturing, such as tech companies, armory companies, etc. We do believe that it is there is a necessity or there is a reason why we have to be doing this. Firstly, men, women, and children who work 18 hours a day and more are being exploited to the extent where they don't even get paid because all the money or the majority of the money go to the foremen who work on the ground for these project sites. To that extent, not only are they being exploited for the product that they have, but then they also aren't even being compensated fairly. To the point where these people are being treated by subhuman standards. We don't think it is fair to allow these companies to exist there any longer. Second thing then is on how they are then polluting the environment and destroying the land of Congo. Congo being a very rich agricultural land, shows the extent to which they have other things they could use this land for. These companies have one, no incentive to be able to protect the environment even if they are mining from, and then two, no reason as to why they're even going to do this because of how it is very difficult for them to be able to stop because of all the money that they are getting, right? The second thing then on why it's legitimate. Firstly, the government own the land belongs to the people of the Democratic Republic of Congo, right? To the extent where it is their homeland and they deserve to protect what is theirs, we think that it's necessarily legitimate for them to do this. But then the second thing on how the government also has a mandate to protect all of their people because of the social contract theory, as the people have been, or as the people have, the government has the people being their major priority or their major sense of protection, we do think that the government has the mandate in order for them to do this. Why then do we think it is going to work, or why is it likely to work? 6 reasons. First of all, the Democratic Republic of Congo has all the necessary structures in order to implement any form of nationalization, i.e. they have a working presidency, they have a working legislation and working judiciary in order to necessitate all the official processes in order for them to put the things in place for them to have this kind of thing be able to work. The second thing then is on how they have the capacity as a sovereign nation to be able to make this decree for for these companies to leave, because these companies necessarily do not have any kind of right to be able to forego whatever either the president or the highest power of the land makes. The third thing then is how even if these companies somehow show reluctance to leave, there are international organizations that are likely to intervene and then help these that's likely to intervene and then help the DRC in that particular regard. Companies like Amnesty, who have interest in the civil rights being, the human rights of these individuals being abused, international organizations such as the UN, which the DRC is a member of, can also make plea deals and make other attempts in order to get their voices heard. Fourth, even if they don't get the support of these international organizations, there are still other support countries that they can rally to be able to help them. Countries such as the US and other form of Western states, who one have a vested interest in the incentives of being able to save these countries. There's nothing that the US likes more than a savior complex, or being able to be the big brother of the country, to be able to like swoop in and then save these particular people. And because they have that incentive, we do think it's likely for them to even help in that particular regard. But even if that does not also work, people's countries such as capitalistic countries like China, Russia, etc., which also want a stake in these parts of things, can necessarily strike up a deal in which the DRC would offer like an amount of ownership or control to these people, as long as they own like a large majority of the mine, like they own like a large percentage of it. Really don't care how that works. Secondly, these companies themselves also do not want a bad reputation necessarily, because if they have any form of objection, already they've come under fire for being people who are exploiting these individuals, exploiting the environment and all that. So we think that they would not want to further cause any form of deterioration on their name or on their brand, such as the tech companies and other forms of retail companies in that particular regard. Before I go on to how the nationalization is going to look like, the PY. They can't help you if you yourself are not helping yourself. The reason why we think that it is important for us to do this is because it gives these other organizations a legitimacy for them to actually swoop in and help you. To the extent where you don't, necessarily take the ownership for yourself, and they are not like what they call it, even though they are doing something bad, we think that when you nationalize it, it makes it more legitimate for other people to come in and then help you. The third reason on how the nationalization is going to look like, as long as the government of the DRC holds like the majority ownership of the mining industry, we really think that that's the best thing for it to happen. Majority or all of it, we really think that's the best thing for it to happen. What then is the next thing? Why we think it should be nationalized? Now, we really do think that nationalization is important. That's what we characterize how the nationalization is going to look like, because of two things. First of all, the government of the DRC has incentives to be able to hire professionals to be able to man these mining companies. This is going to do things like help employment for the people of the country. Because note how individuals or the foreign companies who come to these countries bring their own professionals from outside in order to service these mines. That doesn't mean that there aren't any intellectual graduates in this country who do not have the ability to be able to do these things themselves, but simply because they do not have the chance to be able to represent it in these companies. We believe that in the case of the DRC is probably going to take control of this thing. We think that it is best for them to do this in that particular regard. The second thing then is how they are necessarily going to end the abuse that is being used by the exploitation of women, children, and other vulnerable actors who have no other choice than to go and work in the mines, because if they don't work in the mines, they won't eat and they won't be able to find a place to sleep in that particular regard. We think that these people have a mandate to be able to protect them, but also the incentive, which I'm going to prove to you. The third thing then is how they are then going to, is more like that they are much more like they are going to protect the land and pay more attention to the environmental consciousness that the damage of people is doing to them. Firstly, because of how the DRC is like a largely agricultural country, but secondly also because of how people who are also voicing out their concerns from the country themselves think that these people are going too far in destroying their land, their nature, and other particular things. Why do they have the incentive to do this? 5 reasons. First of all, the votes that come from amounts of people, right? The reason why we think they will do this is because, first of all, we've characterized to you how these companies, we've characterized to you how these countries, the people of this country have an antagonization towards these mining companies and the people who own these mining industries. We think that to the extent where these companies or these people already want them to be driven out, whichever government is able to come in and then save them is much more likely to be able to be voted into the next election cycle. The second thing then is how on national identity, these people necessarily have the national identity that is formed around these people. They have necessarily united against a common enemy for them to be able to fight against one thing, for them to come together to be able to find a solution. The third thing then is on how there is international pressure to the individual that has come together to be able to help them achieve this prospect. The fourth thing then is how there's even on international assistance, countries that have been able to play a role for them to be able to achieve this benefit or to be able to achieve this kind of results. We think they would be much more likely to do this because they don't want to upset the other countries who have helped them achieve this independence. But then secondly, they also want to make sure that they keep on getting the assistance from these countries in that particular regard. Next thing then on why we think they should do this. We think that in order for what they call it, In order for any team to win this round, they have to prove necessarily how the problems that have been posed by the opening government team can be solved in their world with minimal harm or and maximum benefits. Because you can't come and say, as Putin has already not asked for a POI, we can assume that they necessarily agree with this from which I posed for the opening half. And to the extent which we think that we save these people the most amount of trouble, the most amount of human exploitation, and the most amount of environmental protection and sovereignty, we do think we are proud to oppose as opening government here.
There are particular nuances that exist with Congo that need to be addressed in this debate, and when I point out to you these nuances, you realize that none of the cases that hold ranks into this debate particularly stands, because they need to address, because it's not just any mining that is happening in any particular African country, and it's the capabilities of government in nationalization all need to be considered in this debate. I'm going to be doing that. But what does it mean necessarily to nationalize? But two, what does the mining industry of Congo look like? I'll be giving you a couple of rebuttals in the comparative analysis and why we win on win. First things, for a country to nationalize an industry, it means that the government becomes the sole producer and distributor of the services or resources of that industry. Three reasons for this. A couple of reasons for this. One, usually they do this to create more access to the resources and services because it's an essential service that people need to have access to, things like water, electricity, etc. Secondly, the government wants to directly benefit in the sales of that resource because it's in high demand, especially internationally. But the end of the benefit is that the average individual should be able to benefit from it because government will use that money to be able to do things like build roads, provide healthcare, etc. Implications of this is simple. Nationalization must be, one, to the benefit of the people, but two, must be a sustainable venture because of how important it is for the lives of the people. If I'm able to prove that it doesn't benefit the people, if I'm able to prove that it's not a sustainable venture, then at the end of the day, we prove that we shouldn't nationalize in this debate. That is the weighing metric. The Congo mining industry, particularly, is divided into two parts. One, there's the industrial mines, and these industrial mines are usually run mostly by Chinese companies, and it's because it's a part of an agreement and a debt instruction plan that Congo has with China. But this is where a large chunk, 80% of all the resources mined, actually come from, etc. The second part of the Congo mines are the small-scale informal parts, and this is normally characterized by unlicensed and illegal mining that is run by kingpins and mafias within these places that are actively doing the abuse that they are talking about in status quo. But there are two major resources that are mined in Congo in 2024, copper and cobalt, and I'll be impacting what that means to produce, etc. But here's the couple of responses to their cases. One, the harms and abuses of human rights that exist in these mines happen in the small-scale areas. Why? Because largely these places are unregulated and regulations to these places are not enforced. But secondly, they are run by mafias that have militarized the areas in Katanga. That is where this mining actually happens. And proof of this is how media personnel are not allowed into these areas, and oftentimes investigative journalists lose their lives in going into these areas to actually try and uncover the mining. A lot of the industrial parts where a lot of the mining goes on, where these Chinese companies exist, have a lot of international scrutiny because the West is concerned about China, etc. And so all the abuses they talk about don't actually these regions so that we can actively see the harms, something that will be to allow the place to solve. But on the extreme, we think we can organize a joint military invasion into these places, these small-scale areas, sack these militias, and take back these mines. Nationalization is not the way to solve these issues. But here's a couple of things. So I'm going to prove that it's not going to benefit the people, and it's not going to be sustainable. So that's in the conversation here. The conversation here is that the biggest mines are the industrial mines, and they are the ones that are being run privately. If we're going to do any sort of nationalization, and it means the big industrial mines that are actually going to nationalize, so we're taking away the Chinese companies. The small-scale spaces are where the abuses happen. If that's their conversation, then we can just solve that and take over those mines in particular, and that thing doesn't really have an impact in this way. I think it's very, very simple in this debate. They have to prove why we need to sack these Chinese companies in the first place. But I'm going to do a couple of things to prove why this is not a sustainable venture, and something that the people are not going to benefit at the end of the day. I think the first thing is that there are a couple of facts we need to recognize about what is happening in Congo that actively impact the way governments can act in this debate. The first thing is that yes, there's a civil conflict that exists within Congo in very particular important parts of the region in status quo. What that means is that, but most of the militias and rebel groups that are fighting within these areas, who have taken over the mines but are fighting in other places, are reportedly or purportedly to be sponsored by Rwanda. So for the nation, they've actively seen it as a threat to their sovereignty, and they're beginning to put in measures to be able to deal with the issue. What that means is that in any case, the best case scenario of the world, if many money is going to be gotten in the first place, much of the money is just going to be securing these regions particularly. But then what it essentially means is that, what the industrial mines that they are talking about that actually need to be impacted in this debate are actually on the places that are actually having these issues, because these people have a fear of international replications, because if you attack a Chinese mine, the Chinese government will intervene, etc. But then the second thing we need to recognize is there are big conversations of corruption in Congo, because actively these government officials that are actively trying to rig elections, but secondly big scandals of how money that is siphoned from the oil industry, mining that is siphoned from other places, even mining is happening, and these are the people that actively need to get the benefits of status quo, because these are the ones that are actively engaging in the mines, etc. But the other thing that we need to recognize in a couple of facts is that Congo is in heavy debt, and that is the reason why a lot of their mines is privatized in the first place and is run by Chinese companies. They took a lot of loans to be able to do some industrial work which was siphoned by corruption, etc. But what essentially happened, siphoned these things. What that means is that in a world where they are able to actually get these mines and then nationalize them and be able to get the money out of these things, much of it is just going to debt restructuring, be able to pay the debt, which means the average individual never actually gets to see the money that comes into their pockets, etc. But another conversation, another fact that impacts the way that these mines will be run is that Congo doesn't have any refinery to process these materials in the first place. So what it essentially means is that they equally still have to going to be selling it as raw materials back to these Chinese places where it's actually being refined, etc. Because of their global position and the fact that they don't have a lot of global position, they don't have a lot of negotiation because of their debt, they're actively, particularly, they don't have the refinery, a lot of the mining is just going to go to waste, etc., like in status quo. I think I've proven to you on these raw facts that exist within Congo that these mines, even if nationalized, are not going to solve the particular issues that exist within their spaces, and there are particular structural things that we need to deal with in Congo before nationalization can be something that will be sustainable, etc. Insofar as there's a security threats that exist within these places, etc., nationalization is not something that you should prioritizing in the first place, but also that nationalization is not something that is going to be sustainable, because their country could go to war at any time because they are the brink of war, particularly in this debate. If not for anything, I have proven to you that all the problems we point out in this debate doesn't really exist, and we win from that front on way.
Beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. So if I'm able to show you that everything Andrew says occurs in this world, or all the benefits, China is owing Congo is owing China, so they owe 80% of the land. It's a debt restructuring process. We are still able to cater for that debt that Congo owes to China in another way. We win today's debate. Why do we think we are still able to cater for that debt that Congo necessarily owes to China? We recognize that these Chinese people, they have the mining industry. At the point where the government realize that this mining industry is necessarily abused, or the resources there are not being taken care of, or they are affecting the country, we can go to the table. We can restructure these debt plans. We can go for another industry. We can necessarily go on an agreement with them that, oh, we don't want you to take off our debts from our mining industry, but the land, the agriculture, because we recognize that Congo is very good in agriculture. We can go to that aspect and pay off our debts. It still doesn't make sense in your word because sticking to the mining industry is necessarily not the only way. But the second thing he talks to you about is on the 20% of the land, how these illegal mining activities occur there. What does this look like in today's day? So he says that you are going to use the military invasion to sack them out. How does this not solve the problem? When you use the military invasion to solve them, after the military invasion is that these guys are still going to come to the land. They are still going to come and necessarily mine on the land. What does this look like? It looks like when you are solving the problem for that piece of the frame of time, you are not solving the problem for that extensive piece of land. But what do you get in our world? In our world where we nationalize this thing, we recognize that the government has regulations covering all the 100% in our world. Therefore, no side is left uncast. But the second thing we are going to show you is on how necessarily we are able to solve all the challenges Congo faces in our world, if not all, we gain maximum impact in our world as opposed to the Andrew's world. What do you get from Andrew's world? In Andrew's world, you get a world where these foreign companies, these foreign governments actually take charge and abuse and over-exploit and extort the people of Congo. What does this look like in today's day? It looks like these people actually control every activity that occurs in that industry. It means that because it is the 80% or the chunk of it that Andrew talks about, these people necessarily gain most of their profit. The people of Congo are less hungry, are less abandoned, are less depressed in all these cases. What does this mean in today's day? It means that all the challenges that Congo face is still not solved because these people are going to continue to be abused in their world. What does this look like in today's? It looks like these people have no control over these things because naturally there's that invading, there's that interrupting, there's that interference these foreign people have over the mining industry. Panel C, at the end of today's debate, what is our goal? The side that is able to prove to you that the people of Congo gain the maximum things, gain the benefits, gain the positive impact, are protected, have the benefits, have food, have water, have shelter, are able to live a good life better than they lived in the past. We win today's debate. But the next thing I'm going to talk to you about is on how naturally we get better accountability and better transparency in our world. In a world where foreign people, Chinese people are controlling your mining industry, are naturally like interfering in every activity of your mining industry, these Chinese people who you know responsibility or necessarily like they don't have to do something for you. But what do you get in our world? In our world where there's a social contract theory, the government necessarily owes it to the people to make sure that they have these things. They would say that the biggest case that can come from the other side is on how the government has failed them, so they don't have any right to be able to determine for the people. At a point where we recognize that the government has failed them, it does not mean that the government should continuously to fail these individuals. We recognize that if the government has failed them, the government owes it to the people to make sure that the people have all the right things, they are righting their wrongs, and they are able to necessarily provide for the people. How does this look like in our world? It looks like in our world, the government takes over the mining industry. Now there's standardized regulation, there's that's framework, it's just the government that is making sure that all these things are set right. The government looks like they are making sure that these illegal mining activities have licenses, even if it's of this small mining scale, it's all done based on licenses. These people that are working on this is done on licenses. All the profits, all the benefits they are able to obtain goes to them. They know how it's regulated. What happens in your world when you don't nationalize it and you leave it in your world? Now these Chinese people are able to gain profits. Whatever money they make, it goes into their pockets. The debt restructuring process they are even trying to obtain, it's not better obtained because what is the incentive of these people to make sure that you pay off their debts? Because they want to continually use your land for mining activities. They are going to make sure that you are not even able to obtain that debt because they know that because the mining industry is big, you know what? They are not able to obtain that. If you are. The reason why they've not paid on their loan is that one, probably they've not necessarily like recognized how it looks like. But at a point where we realize that the pain, at a point in time, in our world, now we recognize that these people are necessarily not giving us the opportunity to use their resources to pay off the debt. We want that, no, they will switch to a different sector, whether they like it or not, because in our world, what we want to achieve at the end of the day is to make sure that the people have the things to survive. In our world whereby we recognize that these Chinese people or these privatization companies are not giving giving us that we don't want that. They will go to another industry whether they like it or not. Panel, what else does Jeffrey tell you in today's video? Jeffrey has been able to explain to you how the biggest incentive of government or the biggest responsibility of the government is necessarily to be able to make sure that there's sustainability for the people, not just food. Their citizens are not just obtaining their basic needs, but they are not just not being abused. They should be able to make sure that their citizens are not overexploited. These workers that work in that mining industry, they don't exploit them, they don't abuse them, they don't take them through that pain, that harshness of life. But secondly, they should be able to make sure that when these individuals leave that side, they know that their governments are necessarily are for them and they are able to protect them. But panel, what have I showed you in today's debate? One, I've been able to show you how because the government owes it to the people and because they have failed them time and number does not mean they should continually to fail them. They have the opportunity to make things right, so they should be able to make things right with them. The second thing I've showed you is on how these debt things can be paid in our world regardless. They are able to obtain this. But the third thing I've showed you is on how surely these illegal mining activities, when you bring military invasion, you even heighten the anger they feel. That means that they are going to still invade us when they are still going to take over that illegal mining activity when the military invasion is stopped. It means that you don't solve the problem in your world, we solve the problem in our world. But no, at the end of today's debate, why should you place OG first? You should know that OG is a side that gives you a good framework of what this illegal what this mining industry looks like. The second thing you should be able to know is that OG is the side that shows you how the nationalization is actually going to look like. And at that point, and a point at which we are that the nationalization should occur. OG shows you that when these people are abusing our resources, we need to take control over the mining industry. And when our people need it, we need to save our people and we need to make sure that the people have all the rights, the right to food, the right to be able to live a good life available to them. Panel, we win today's debate and our closing can be us. All these reasons, proud OG.
I'll prioritize closing line. I need your POI. Alright. Okay. Panel, OG is fourth in this debate for one reason. Every case they argue to you is a truism. The government has a social contract, so because of that, they should take this action without particularly proving to you the weight of those social contracts. The weight of every social contract that the government has with these people is that the government needs to be able to provide certain benefits to the people and to actively protect the people in that regard. If I'm able to prove that there's no benefit that acquires from these things, this thing becomes a consignment venture, or secondly, there's no protection that is ensued by this action that they're taking, then the principle on social contract becomes a truth in this debate. We actually get that in the world. It's something that you can't buy. Then a lot of the other things, the international help that they talk about, can't really be a conversation in this debate because, like I point out in the POI, the US, all these actors they talked about actively know about the harms that are happening within these places. But why haven't they taken any significant action to be able to help these people? It's because the harms are not happening in the industrial sector where all of these things, like where a lot of the mining takes place, but in the small scale places where have been actively militarized by these military groups in order to abuse these people, etc., like in status quo. But it's even worse on their side because, like, when you nationalize the whole industry, let's assume their case is true. When you nationalize the whole industry, it's particularly worse in this debate because you reduce the incentive for them to actively participate within these areas. Because the IMF, the US, and all the UN have been actively keeping an eye on the Congo mines for one reason, because it's dominated by Chinese companies and they are worried about the international implications of the actions that are taken within these places. So they're keeping an eye to make sure the abuses don't take place in this debate. But the moment you nationalize and sack them out, there's no incentive for them to look into this place because they don't have any international actors that are in these places for them to engage. All that matters to them is that now the cobalt and the copper is coming to them, and like we need like etc. But there are a couple of other things that they argue. Their biggest case that is not a truism, etc., is the case on pollution, and they think that Congo should take charge of its own pollution in a way that means that we shouldn't be allowing people to exploit our own land, and that we should be able to do it ourselves, or that we want to stop pollution, etc. Here's the response to it: a couple of things. I think number one, that is actually non-comparative because mining in itself is inherently very pollutive. If you are going to still keep the copper mining after you nationalize, if you're still going to be mining the cobalt, which is actually radioactive, alternative, you are still going to have to pollute the environment. You need to dig holes. You need to wash through lakes. You have to actively cut down trees. Mining is not comparative. But secondly, safe mining actually happens in industrial areas because these people have the machines to be able to do it in the best way kind of possible, to mean that people's lives are protected. They have the gear, etc. Because the Chinese have an incentive for them to be able to do it in the best way possible, international rep, etc. But then regardless, Congo doesn't have the funds to acquire the safe mining tools and methods in a way that means that when they nationalize, they'll be able to nationalize in a way that's actually safe for the environment. What this means is that they'll still harm the environment on their side. These three things means that they don't have a case in this debate, and OG is fourth on that regard. CG. That is actually true. That is actually true in this debate, and I've been impacting to you why. So, I'm going to explain to you why that in itself cannot weigh in this debate because of this conversation in particular. But a couple of things I need to explain in this debate and why privatization is good, and this is the extension that I'm bringing to you. When any government decides to privatize a key industry, it's because of one thing: a conversation of outsourcing. Because the government have actively recognized that they don't have the capability to be able to engage in the production process of that particular thing, but secondly, to actively be able to distribute it in a way that could distribute to the people in a way that is actually beneficial. So what they do is that they allow private individuals who have a private incentive to be able to engage within this particular key industry in a way that means that they're able to do the production in the best way possible, but secondly, distribute it in the best way possible. So what they normally do with privatization is that there's a conversation, there's an agreement that comes to terms where the government decides that there's a certain percentage of money that they take away their production and from their ability to distribute etc, such that the government is actively getting benefits on that regard. There are tax methods that they actually use to be able to get these companies to be able to give them money etc. We think all those things exist in status quo. But here's why nationalization, particularly for Congo, is a bad thing given the capabilities that they have. We think first of all, like any government, especially the Congo government, they have multiple ventures that they actively have to take care of. This is a statement of fact, and I don't think anybody can challenge this debate. 70% of the people that live in Congo live in poverty. They live under $2 a day. That is actually what happens in these places. What that means is that there's already active conversations of infrastructure development that needs to take place in these places. That there's a lot of conversations about provision of healthcare, and all these things that need to go to these people. It means there are multiple ventures that the government has to do. Whatever money, whatever funds that the government has cannot actively go into the nationalization in a way that they'll be able to mine in the best way possible and get the most out of it in a way that means that they'll be able to distribute it to the people particularly. But he says that, what can happen is that we can bring private actors into this debate to contract them to be able to do the production, etc, to be able to get the money. The conversations about that is the leverage that these things, the leverage that Congo has in this debate, and I'm going to be explaining that before that OG. Honestly, I don't think that POI makes sense because the privatization actively brings conversation because there's a lot of scrutiny that goes into privatization because there are active contracts that you can look to say that this is the contract that we had with you and the actions that you are taking are flouting the contract. We can take you to the ICJ, we can take you to other international bodies or deport you from our country based on the contract that we have. The illegal miners are doing this out of law and are causing all the harms that exist within these places. If it is actively true that these harms are happening in industrial industries, then we should have sacked these miners long ago and brought in new private industries to be able to take care of these things. The privatization is something that is actively benefiting Congo, and we think on that regard we still want to maintain it. But here's the conversation. He says that we're going to have private individuals come into this space. The reason why privatization can't happen in Congo is the reason why you can't have nationalization and privatization exist on the spectrum in Congo, particularly in this debate, is that what will happen is that Congo doesn't have the kind of leverage to be able to negotiate with these private individuals in a way that means that they're actively going to get a lot of money. That is why the full privatization was taking place in the first place, because most of the time they are not engaging particularly contributing significantly to the mining. They are not contributing significantly to the distribution. And private individuals with the incentive, considering that Congo is actively competing with Idaho in producing cobalt and copper for the whole world, it becomes significantly difficult because they don't have the leverage for them to negotiate in a way that means that they're actively going to get the maximum benefits that they want. What that means is that if they want to maximize benefits in their world, they want to claim and have any impact, they have to fully nationalize, and the privatization will not exist. But secondly, the only time you can have part privatization with these industries and have it to your advantage is when these private industries, private individuals exist within your country as national countries, like there are individuals that own and they work in your country, etc. But this doesn't happen in the world because all the mining industries are not owned by any local people in that regard, so that can be a conversation in this debate. We think for the reason that Congo is outsourcing to be able to mine these things, and they have like about 10-20% of the profits that they're getting from these industrial mines, etc. We think it's particularly great. But on Chinese loans, they're definite. You can't flout agreements. You can't take them to the ICJ. On that regard, they can't argue any of the arguments that they run in this debate. We think it's particularly important to keep it the way it is. Here.
Am I supposed to speak into the microphone or something? Do here. Go. What's that? I was like, it's also streaming. So as I'm breaking out, I feel I'm movie video. So are we ready? Panel. The only thing God has blessed the DR Congo with is their mineral resources. We believe that by virtue of this blessing, by nationalizing this industry, it puts DR Congo in the best position to use these resources to their benefit. Before I get into anything else, it is important for us to understand what nationalization is, what it entails, and why this nationalization in of itself is something that is a conversation at all that would inspire the CAP members to set this motion in the first place. So what is nationalization? When a country or a state nationalizes an industry, what they do is that they own that industry. In that, ownership is going to be vested in the state. But simply because ownership is vested in the state, it doesn't mean that the exploitation and the use of those resources are solely in the hands of the state. That is why even though countries like Venezuela have nationalized their oil industry, or Ghana has nationalized its oil industry, and vesting ownership in the state, they can still give licenses or contracts to other private individuals to use all of those resources to the benefit of the state. But the unique thing that comes with this nationalization is because ownership and control vest in the state has the largest bargaining chip to dictate how this particular practice is going to be done in the first place. That is something that we have to accept. Now, why is this conversation happening? Why is this debate happening in the first place? Because foreigners and private individuals have consistently exploited all of these resources to the detriment of DR Congo. The same way they were doing with the blood diamonds in Botswana, the same way they were doing with the oil industry in Venezuela and in Mexico. All of these different countries nationalize those industries, and I'm going to be explaining to you why in the situation where the DR Congo does the exact same thing, it is going to be to their benefit. But before I get into anything, why? What's the reason for such nationalization? There are key sectors of the economy that are nationalized so that the government can implement policies. So during crises, such as the COVID-19 pandemic, etc., governments, by virtue of the control that they have over things like utilities, they can reduce or remove pricing for those things. So during COVID, the Ghanaian government, the US, etc., they removed pricing, or they removed the cost for things like water or electricity to make them free. These are the things that you can do when you nationalize a particular industry in that particular regard. We believe that the government of the DRC owes the people a duty to nationalize this industry to accrue all of the benefits, mostly to the people. On to our first extension on the environment and public health. Note, foreign and private ownership has been terrible for the government and the health and the safety of the people. We believe that that's why Andrew can run so many of his cases, because our opening does a terrible job at characterizing why this privatization is uniquely terrible for the DRC specifically, and why most of the benefits that accrue from the mining accrues to these private individuals and the foreigners and not the DRC. So how and why? This is the mechanism. One, foreigners and private people own these mines, not the government in their world. Secondly, these people, by virtue of the monopoly that they have over these resources, it puts them in the position to lobby and also to capitalize on the lax labor laws that exist. But thirdly, because of this monopoly, they get away with polluting the environment and harming the ecosystem. But fourthly, the foreigners and the private people do not feel the immediate impact of their actions. All they feel are the benefits or the profits that accrue to them, so they generally just don't care. But fifthly, there is so much happening on the international landscape that people just don't see, nor do they care about what's happening in the DRC. Because there's COVID, there's things happening in China and Taiwan, there's the Russian-Ukraine war, there's the Israel-Palestinian war, all of those different things. That takes away the attention of the international landscape. But sixth reason, because these corporations and countries have a vested interest in the money of the company, they influence the media like Al Jazeera, CNN, BBC, etc., to either to not report on this particular event or to report on other things. But on seventh structural reason, they mostly do not employ people in the DRC because, like Andrew said, they have all these fancy tech and all those things. So they need engineers that have the requisite knowledge or expertise to actually use all of these things. But even if you are saying that they do hire these artisanal management, we're still going to show you why this particular better in our world. Why are all of these 8 structural rules important? They show you why the impact is a lot worse in their world and how these people get away with highway robbery. How is nationalization going to be the solution to this? 1, you take away control from these people to do as they please. But 2, you also take away the negotiating power that they have to lobby. But 3, you are able to create a framework to actually have these artisanal miners or whatever the situation to do so safely and legally. The exact same thing that the Ghanaian government has been trying to do with the artisanal miners. But 4, you can enforce the laws and policies better. But 5, you equally control, and very importantly, you control the revenue that accrues from the mining to your benefit. But on our second extension, on how we increase the global leverage that the DRC has on the international landscape, this is very important. The DRC holds over 70% of the world cobalt reserves. Now note, these resources are crucial for making things like batteries for your smartphones or Tesla's vehicles, etc., etc. Currently, the multinational corporations dominate the extraction of cobalt. 2, countries all over the world and many corporations like Tesla, Apple, whatever the situation, they rely on these natural resources for them to make all of their tech and all these different things. How then does nationalization enhance the DRC's geopolitical power? On 2 things. 1, on negotiating power. By nationalizing, the DRC becomes a key player in the global supply chain of these resources, which they have a monopoly over. This nationalization puts them in a better position to 1, negotiate for better terms with these foreign companies, but 2, to ensure fairer prices and contracts for all of the things that these people are going to be doing. But on second impact, the nationalization puts the DRC in a strategic position to manage the supply of these resources, and this puts them in the position to influence the prices of the resources to their benefit. The impacts are simple and are 2. 1, this price control would contribute significantly to the economy of the DRC, but 2, they have greater leverage for foreign policy. We show you why simply this nationalization is better for the DRC and how they are better able to help the environment, which is the prerequisite for any and everything that anybody is going to be doing. Vote closing government in your delivery.
audible enough? All right. So I start now. Like all African countries, the Democratic Republic of Congo is a developing nation plagued with a host of economic and governmental failures, inflation, widespread poverty, among others. But unlike many African nations such as Rwanda, Botswana, South Africa, these failures are outstandingly worse in DRC. Issues of political instability that is manifested as unfettered autocracy of the family of Ali Bongo and his autocrats who have constantly ruled the DRC for decades and decades, which is very problematic. Issues like extreme poverty and human rights abuses that are orchestrated by states. Issues like hunger, high unemployment rate, widespread systemic corruption, nepotism, ethnocentrism that are intentionally sidelining sections of the population exist in DRC. Failures of significant state institutions such as the foreign industry, such as mining industry and all those other industries that are operated by state. This is very important. The impact of this is in twofold. One is that DRC is not merely a developing country, it is a significantly underdeveloped and very progressive developing country. These guys make it look so nice. It is a shitty country in that regard. Two, in the absence of any immediate structural or governmental reforms on their part, there is no hope and no proof on their part that the government will suddenly become competent and accountable when they take over mining industry. They don't do anything in that regard. So the concession in today's debate is simple. We think most of the profits will go to the private institution. We agree. But two, we agree that the government has the right to the property, the mining industry. We also agree. The problem with the whole of government bench is in twofold. One, they fail to establish the uniqueness of the mining industry warranting its nationalization, especially because the industry is the other industry like the forestry industry, which is saturated by private individuals as well. Two, the whole government failed to establish any necessity or any agency for this move. We told you that the urgent needs of the people, the need for food, for water, among others, are the most needs that we prioritize in today's debate. They don't win on anything. Mining is the bedrock of the Congolese industry, as CG tells you, because it provides employment for the people. Two, it provides great revenue for the government through taxation. And three, it also provides some form of foreign traction by inviting foreigners to come and invest in that regard. How does the privatization work? You don't get that from opening. It works in three ways. One, it looks like these private industries are highly profit incentivized. That means they invest massively in the industry. That means they invest in skills training of their workers and employees. They invest in corporate social responsibility because they want to look good in the eyes of the public, in the eyes of the government. Three, it means they provide employment for the locals because they are able to expand, they are able to be productive, they are able to profit up, right? These guys see, yes, they provide employment, but that employment, they exploit the workers. Panel. These guys on their world, there's no employment at all. We think it is better for us to provide employment even if there's some form of exploitation, because on their world you provide no guarantee that you employ those people, right? Why is it important? Three things. One is that we get high productivity on our world because I told you that we massively invest in our side. Two, we are able to expand the company, broaden its scope, invite more investors, and aside increase more employment. Three, it means that because we are able to be more productive and expand, there's high revenue returns to the government because we are being taxed because we are operating within our world. But how does the nationalization harm the citizens and the state, right? This is the most important part. Panel, nationalization means government gains major control in two ways. One, in leadership. That means the Congolese government, the corrupt Congolese government, are the ones who decide who is the head of the mining industry. They decide who is the one to be employed, how many people are to be employed, as opposed to the world where it's dictated by private institutions. Two, it means management. It means the government has a direct control about the budgeting, the financing, the skills training of workers, among others. Why is it problematic? Two ways. One is that we already established that the country is broke. That's why we agree with OO. OO said the country is in debt. We agree. That means that highly indebted country will not suddenly have money to finance the budget of the industry when they take over. Right? Two, corruption. These guys are highly corrupt. They will want. It means that leadership of the ministry or the industry will be rotated among friends and family, and unemployment and employment will be dished out on the ticket of nepotism, ethnocentrism, and not based on skills, because, as we said, our world is more profit incentivized. We will invest massively investment in that regard. Why is this bad? 5 reasons. One is that there's less productivity in our world because they destabilize the leadership system. Two, there's less investment in their world because they're now clamping down on private institutions. Three, it means there's less productivity profitability on their world, that means less return to the government. 4, it means there's more unemployment in the world, because if the company is unproductive as in the world, that means some people will be laid off in that regard. But 5, it means the government will be less accountable, because I've already told you that they have a very shaky democratic system that's very problematic in that regard. What are the impacts, harmful impacts on the individual? 1 is the fact that people are now going to be increasingly sidelined because the government is highly ethnocentric and biased, as I've already proven to you, unless Congo has suddenly changed from yesterday. 2, it means they're going to aggravate the issues that are bothering the nation. Things like poverty will aggravate, hunger will aggravate, unemployment will aggravate. That's also going to incite the violence, the strikes and humanitarian crisis that led to the ousting of Ali Bongo some years back. That means they likely will have protests among the citizens again in that regard. We don't think that is exactly. Hanif will take you guys, I'm sorry. On the environment, probably that's the most interesting case they present. They say that private groups don't care about the environment, they engage in pollution and all those kind of things and mess up the system. 3 responses to that. 1, panel. They provide no mechanization on how environmental pollution will suddenly cease when the government take over. Check your nose. They don't tell you how government bodies all of a sudden have incentive to protect their environment, given that governmental institutions have constantly collaborated with private institutions to pollute the environment. They don't prove to you how that will solve the problem. 2, they provide no context of how harmful these environmental violations are, so much so that they outweigh all the utilities that I've already outlined to you. That is the third argument. Response to that is that it is actually not true that these guys, all they do is just pollute the environment, because most of these private institutions, like the companies that are operating in the mining industry in DR Congo, for instance, they are companies that have ties from developed countries like China, US, among others. Those are countries that have high incentive to protect the environment and have been increasingly pushing for advocates against environmental pollution. In that regard, we think that in our world we better advocate for the protection of the environment, but even if it doesn't happen, we don't see how it happens in our world, and given all the goods, all the benefits get in our world, we don't see how they place over in today's debate. So that is their biggest clash on environmental pollution. Doesn't work. These guys are very laughable, right? Because how we engage them, they are non-comparative. They just assume private industries are as bad as they say, and nothing good on the government side. We prove to you the utility in our world, and the harms exist, but those harms are outweighed by all the structural failures of government. It's been a good day to win.
Panel, the opening half was fixated on human rights abuses and how which side better solves human rights abuses. The reason why Andrew was able to run in this case is because of the one-line response that he get from OG, that the social contract exists. Here are reasons why in our world we solve that human rights abuses. 1, countries can be directly held accountable for human rights and environmental abuses because the DRC is part of the ICC, the Paris Accord, and etc. Private companies are not part of these accords, so when they evade these rights or they abuse human rights, it's extremely difficult to hold them accountable. Panel, at least in our world, when DRC is committing these things, we can attach conditions to loan, we can attach conditions to things that they need from the international community to be able to ensure that environmental degradation, human rights abuses that exist will not happen, right? Panel, also leaders, when it is nationalized, it will be controlled by a mining industry or mining ministry, right? The leaders of the mining sector can be questioned in parliament. We can question these people as to why people are dying in the mining sector, etc., right? And also, panel, also notice that because the DRC needs foreign aid, they are likely to check these abuses. These are things that you do not get from private individuals because there's nothing that ties them to the international community to implement human rights human rights laws, etc. Right? Here are reasons why the deadlock in opening house has been solved by CG. Right? Panel, what are our cases? First of all, the way up. You get from OG, oh, you protect the environment. The DRC has the power to have skilled labor, etc. Here is why we win the debate. We give you a principal justification as to why the mining sector should be controlled by the government. Two, we show you how the DRC has leverage on international landscape and be able to have more profit, to be able to solve all the poverty, corruption, etc. that OO is, or the opening bench is so concerned about. Three, we argue to you the environmental and public health like concerns and how the nationalization solve this problem. Why do we win this debate? We said that our cases are logically prior because the environment case like solves all the problems from OG. We also prove to you how the DRC is able to utilize the resources that they have currently to the advantage of the ordinary citizen of Congo, because that's what the the up bench like actually cares about it. Panel, our cases. One, principal justification. I know I argue to you that currently 70% of the world's cobalt is in Congo. We say that in a world where a key sector or resource, the mining sector contributes, is key to your economy, it is unjustified for that to be held by private individuals, because what this then means is that private companies can hold the state to ransom in a situation where, like Nanote argues to you why it is important for the government to have control over important key sectors, right? Because they're able to implement policies. He gave you examples of how during COVID, the government was able to reduce tariffs, etc., to be able to change the circumstances or to be able to affect the ordinary citizens. When these key sectors are being controlled by private individuals, the government loses that power to be able to help the ordinary citizens, right? So we argue to you leverage on international landscape. Panel, the only way the DRC will be able to have that negotiating power to be able to like have value for their resources is when that resources is like concentrated in the state, because it's the state that can go about with bilateral trade deals and multilateral trade deals. In a situation where majority of your resources are concentrated or are controlled by individuals, the state does not have that power to go into bilateral trade deals, multilateral trade deals with like international, with other countries to be able to leverage on the resources that they have. Panel, on the environment case, we see that because of the monopoly that these private companies have, they are mostly able to evade accountability. From my introduction, I gave you the reason why they're able to evade accountability. In our world, a country is less likely to evade accountability based on the fact that they say that they are poor. What this then means is that the DRC at all points in time needs external help. We say that this external help that they need can be used as a leverage for the government to do better. So for example, if you are going for a loan, they can tell you that ensure that the mining sector implements human rights like laws or regulates human rights abuses in the mining sector. In our world, we are able to have like we are able to solve human rights abuses. Panel, notice that when the government also has leverage over the mining sector, they can create reserves. So for example, in DRC, they can say that this part of the land will not be degraded or will not be mined because of the fact that we are part of the Paris Accord, we are part of the international community that believes in climate change, etc. In their world, they are losing all these things because the government does not have the power. Moving on to rebuttals. What do you get from CO? Believe that like their arguments are ludicrous because they say that we do not show the urgency. Panel. Currently, the people in Congo are hungry. They are subject to poverty because of these private individuals. Why is this true? Because when they come into your land, they will not like employ a Congolese as their managing partner or as the person that has more like that has so much money, or they'll pay you so much money. Because of the monopoly that they have, they are likely to take like children. That is why children are the ones mining these things. That is why people are losing their lives because of the fact that they have monopoly and they are dying, right? They should tell us that currently as these people, this mining sector is privatized, they should be able to prove to us the benefits that the ordinary Congolese is having from like the mining sector being privatized. Right? They talk about investments. Panel, notice that these people will invest anyway. Cobalt, copper, all these things are things that the tech industry needs. Silicon Valley, the tech companies in Silicon Valley needs this thing to be able to invest all the technologies that they need. These people know the importance of these resources. They will invest anyway. I'm sorry, I have a lot of responses to do. Then their biggest case on corruption. This is a wash. Because panel, if corruption exists in both sides, they don't show us how corruption is solved in their world. So panel, in their world, right, these corrupt leaders will sell will allow these private individuals to come and mine, and they get the profit. At the end of the day, what they can say is that, oh, we are not the ones in charge of the mining sector, it is these private individuals. Pano, in our world where this mining sector is managed by the states, we are able to hold them directly accountable. They cannot like point hands at these private individuals and say that, oh, they do not have the power to do anything because the private individuals are the ones in charge. In our world, they're able to call out these governments. Panel, notice that in their world, there is no opt-out. If you are able to say that the corrupt leaders of Congo are changed and we have a better government, then this means that at least we have some form of utility in their world. In your world where these things are privatized, there is no opt-out. There's no opt-out. Now, what is like OO's case? I've been able to rebut it, right? They say that, oh, Congo does not have any refinery. Based on analysis, arguments on how nationalization works, we've been able to prove to you how. So, panel, we are the only side that brings you the best arguments. We've been from CG.
Starting in 3, 2, 1. Government did not do their job well because they assume, oh God, Framers say, oh, Charlie. Starting in 3, 2, 1. Government did not do their job well. And the reason is, both of them assume that at the time that we nationalize mining companies within DRC, it means that the state automatically is going to behave well and the state is going to do the right thing. Why these guys are much weirder than their opening is because they are just running whatever their opening run, but in the part that makes them the weirdest is they assume that things like cobalt, things like copper, etc. are necessities that people within the country need to survive. Thus, when crisis and other things happen, government will have to reduce the prices for people. We think things that people need are things like water, electricity, shelter, food, etc. The only way people can get these kind of things is when they are able to have sources of employment that can give them a job. But then another thing that you did not get throughout the whole of the debate, and you got it from Chris, is that mining is not just buying food and eating. Mining is a serious job. One, it is costly. Two, there are always going to be harms to the environment which are supposed to be repaired after all. But then the third thing is that mining is one that once it's in the hand of one individual, it is very dangerous. That is why states themselves have been controlled internationally. That is why the prices of things like oil, etc. have been regulated so that one state, so that one body cannot be in charge of it. What they do in their world is to give the power to a group of individuals who have been proven over time to be corrupt and individuals that are not doing their job well. Their biggest question to us is to say, oh, show how in your world corruption is going to end. We'll show it to you and we win over you on that particular claim. So, three major clashes. First clash. The first clash was on the control of the mining industries. OG gave you two things. OG said, one, the people within this mining site are exploited. So once we nationalize it, the state will be able to pay them the amount of money that they need to be paid. But then the second thing is to say, oh, once the state is able to control it, they can pay off all the loans that they have. I asked them a POI that they could never answer. Their biggest counter to that was to say, the agricultural sector is already functioning. The question is, if it is functioning so well in status quo, why haven't the state been able to pay off their loan? It's simple, Hano. It's because states pay off loans when they think it is necessary. DRC have been having the money and they refuse to pay the loans as the years are going by. That even proves to a large extent that when they are having more money, they'll still not pay these loans in the long run. But then from OO, their biggest engagement to these guys is to say, oh, when they even take on the mining sites, they can't refine the resources, they'll still give it out as raw materials. And then the second thing they say is, oh, they'll use all the revenue to pay off the loans. These guys are also weird as our opening. How did these people come into that? These people came with their price control argument. Let them control the price so that they'll control the economy well. The second thing is they will influence import and exportation. What did you get from Chris? 3 things. One, Chris made you understand that at the time of decentralizing these kind of things and the power that happens, what happens is there's going to be a reduction in the output that is happening. How does this work? This looks like how the state itself want to control the money that is happening. It looks like how the Bongo family and all the people that exist within them want to control the money. They do not want anything to go out. At the time that you give them the power, one, they wouldn't be incentivized to even push these people to give out more productions and more things. But then on the issue of import and exportation, it means that these people are now in control of what they export and what they import. And we think that these people have a lot of incentive to import and export as and when they want. It means they wouldn't be bothered about controlling the prices, but they'll export hastily because they need the money. They want to spend the money and they do not want to pay off the debt. But then the second thing is that within these states are non-existential infrastructures that are needed to mine most of these resources. It means when these private individuals leave, one, the state will now have to take more loans to build infrastructures and other basic necessities that are needed for them to mine these resources in the first place. Why that is harmful is because the same country you are saying is poor is taking in more money to put themselves in more harm. On the comparative, why do we win over everybody? In our world, we make you understand that the private guys are individuals that care about their own image and what they do at every particular point in time. It's because they always care about the profit. It then means that in our world, these people can always make sure that they produce the things in a large grade. But even if people are corrupt in our world, we think that government do not always want private guys to go on their way and get what they want. It means when the people call out the government, they'll always make sure that they regulate the private individuals well. But when government is in control, they do not care much about the people because they are benefiting directly. And whether the people are crying or dying, the government still thinks that we are benefiting and they wouldn't take any proper actions to protect the people. But then on the environment, OG says the environment is being polluted and destroyed. Their closing said the same thing. No mechanization as to how they are going to solve that once the states end up nationalizing them. Our opening said that international bodies can always force Congo to make sure that they do the right thing. What did you get from Chris? 3 things. One, Chris makes you understand that private individuals that exist within these states have a lot of incentives to make sure that they protect the environment and control it on the longer run. This is because of how they sign contracts with the state, how the state can always call them out, and how the state can even take them to international regulations and other things. But then the second thing is that existing within these states are legal systems that they can always take these private individuals to and get them pay off and repair this environment. But then the international world also cares about what is happening because DRC is one of the countries that is dying. But then in their world, what happens is that the government can always shift blames like they are doing in status quo, saying that the industries that exist in my world are not my problem. I'm not the one controlling them. It looks like how Adodi is still blaming Britain, etc. for them to pay us money because he thinks that the underdevelopment that is happening within Ghana is not his problem. But before then, closing.
None of their cases are mutually exclusive. They say that when it's nationalized, you are sacking the private individual. We are saying that at the very least, the profits accrue to the government.
Yeah, so we relax. So 15 minutes is finished. We proved to you that the private individuals have incentives to correct all the problems that we have given. In their world, they just assume the government is going to behave. We make you understand that there exist structural problems which are not even going to allow this nationalization to exist. I won't take care. These structural problems have to be solved in the first place for the good thing to be done. But then, let's understand on safeguarding the life of the citizens. OG says that the citizens are being exploited, extorted, and these citizens already are antagonizing against these systems. So they assume that when government tries to nationalize, the citizens will support the government. Like, people are hungry, they want a police to work. Once government is trying to nationalize, they should be assured that there's an alternative that they can work with and make money. Our opening said that, the corruption is bad, like the money won't go to the people. So in the long run, the government will spend the money. Almost the same logic, right? But then here's why our logic still wins over that. See, these people, their biggest case is their price argument. We think that at every point in time, individuals that even work in places, even if they are extorted, the most thing that they always care about is what they are going to be given in the long run. Already, the state of DRC have failed to provide these people most of the basic things that they need. There exists a 100% uncertainty